Thank you very much for this very kind introduction. I hope it was accurate, but I couldn't take my hearing devices for this. Let me first start with a little disclaimer or better apology to you. In the program, you find one title of my presentation which doesn't exactly correspond to this one, and I will just briefly first explain why is that so. The title which I kindly got from the organizer actually corresponded to a paper which is already published, and it is published based on my speech in the Polish Supreme Court back in June 2014, and this is why Joanna probably recognizes the building on this photo. It is the Polish Supreme Court that I photographed at that opportunity. So in any case, that paper, I think it's still very interesting, but you can find it and you can read it. So I thought that speaking about higher courts in the 21st century, we have to find something a little bit more updated. And then I thought, well, maybe I can speak about a July decision of the CJEU in the Han Invest case. That is a Croatian case in which basically the Court of Justice of European Union found that the binding legal opinions, the positions of the plenary sessions of Croatian courts, higher courts, are not in line with the internal judicial independence, which probably, well, I think that my preceding speaker would agree that this now puts in question a lot of those mechanisms that have been presented in the preceding presentation. But then again, I thought, well, maybe you can just first read the Han Invest case, then I can speak about that in the next lecture when I will be invited here to Budapest. What I'm going to speak about now is something that is very, very recent, and you will see that some of the events have been happening just literally less than 1 week ago in that context. But it's also a very old presentation on an issue that has been with us for quite some time, and this is the open justice concept. I promised to Marta to tell you a couple of ideas from my previous text, and I will just start with the first slide showing that, for instance, the new developments in the third millennium really have changed the landscape with the Supreme Court and higher courts generally. So first of all, what we have now, what is very new, is the emerging superiority of transnational tribunals. And again, I'm not going to speak a lot about that. We heard about how CJEU, how the Strasbourg Tribunal actually bring us a new reality. Supreme courts are not supreme anymore. They just hold the name of Supreme Courts. But effectively, this is what the jurisprudence is being done elsewhere. The second change is, well, allegedly a technical one, but it is a tremendous change. Namely, what is going now on with the development of technology is really bringing new reality. Well, let's just mention digitization, artificial intelligence, all the topics that you hear about in all of the conferences now, but they are really changing the landscape and the expectations of the court users. However, what I'm going to speak about is going to be connected to the topic of this conference, and this is judicial independence. We also have a much more pronounced emphasis on the organizational autonomy of the judiciary. And, well, now we expect that judiciaries in many countries would self-regulate themselves. However, the big power brings big liabilities. And this is now particularly true because what we face nowadays is many challenges which have, again, been a reason why the society now expects something very different from courts. Let us start, for instance, with 5 challenges which we can identify. First is the challenge of speed. Life is today much faster than it used to be, and it requires significant changes, but justice is, unfortunately, still slow. The second challenge is the challenge of technology. I already stated that this brings tremendous challenges in changes in communication, presentation, the use of digital means, but justice system is often slow in adopting all these challenges. The third one is the challenge of massification. We live in industrial societies, but our judicial proceedings were designed to deal with individual one-on-one disputes, and this is not anymore corresponding to what is going on around us. The fourth challenge is a challenge of costs. Access to justice is becoming increasingly difficult due to financial obstacles and the rise in legal costs everywhere. And finally, the challenge of wisdom. Society today needs wise and innovative solutions for social polarization and increasingly complex legal disputes. So both civil and criminal justice are expected to find adequate solutions. What do we get out of it? The result is summarized, well, quite interestingly in the year 2000 in the title of the book, published, edited actually by a Oxford professor, Adrian Zuckerman, and it says that justice is in crisis. Now, what we have as a solution nowadays, the crucial challenge in the relationship between society and judiciary today is how to respond to all of these challenges, and the concept that we have is the concept of independent judiciary. So far, we have not found any system that would be better than the one that is based on the rule of law, on the human rights and independence of justice, but it also means that judiciary is alone. It is independent, but also responsible for autonomously finding solutions and providing efficient services to society, also convincing the public that it is competent, efficient, free from undue political and other influences, and able to guarantee a fair trial to everyone under its jurisdiction. We get hereby to one of the key questions. The crucial challenges is how can judiciary gain trust of people and the society? And here I would remind you of an old question that seeks to resolve this eternal paradox. This is originally Juvenal's quote. It states, "Quis custodiet ipsos custodes?" Who watches the watchman? If judiciary is independent, who controls it? If the judiciary operates autonomously and follows self-made rules, how can those who rely on its services be assured that decisions will be made free from corruption? How can we ensure that only the best candidates become top judicial officials and not those selected through political ties? And how can we encourage judges to work diligently? So this question, quis custodiet ipsos custodet, was also a question which appears in the title of a famous article written by Mauro Cappelletti, a famous Italian civil proceduralist, who published this in the American Journal of Comparative Law. And Cappelletti is considered to be one of the founders of comparative civil procedure. This paper is from 1982. And in this paper, he developed 3 models of judicial responsibility. On one side, there is a repressive or dependency model, and in this model, the judiciary is subservient to politically accountable to the holders of political power. In the second model, the corporative autonomous model, judicial independence is absolute. It is absolutized up to the point of making the judiciary a corps séparé, and it is totally insulated from government and society. What Cappelletti supported was neither of these 2 models. He viewed them as equally damaging to society. Instead, what he advocated was a model that combines a reasonable degree of political and societal responsibility with a reasonable degree of legal responsibility. And this model, he called it the model of social responsiveness, is a user-oriented model. In this model, the judiciary is oriented towards the needs of the ultimate consumers, but it does not subordinate itself to political branches, to political parties, or to other organizations. So, Cappelletti argued for the greater responsiveness to society's needs and aspirations, and thus he promoted a model which we know as checks and balances. And he described that as a model which reflects central ideal of a democratic system of government. And now I will bring you to three stories, three examples of how checks and balances misfunction. Let me start with the United States of America, a country which recognizes checks and balances as a foundational principle of government. Do you know who this charming gentleman is? It is the longest-serving judge of the American Supreme Court. And maybe some of you know, what was he famous of lately? Well, he was famous because it was found that he had secretly accepted luxury trips from a billionaire friend, and these perks also included free trips around the world on his super yacht and regular free flights on a private jet. And not only that, Clarence Thomas accepted these luxury trips and did not think that he needed to disclose them because, as he said, he was advised by colleagues that this sort of personal hospitality from close personal friends did not need to be reported. And he also pointed out that he had been friends with the billionaire for over 25 years. Maybe you heard what the societal response was. Let's see what some evening hosts with the audience of millions have told about Clarence Thomas. Well, public satire. For instance, Stephen Colbert noted that it is very easy to gain friends once you become a judge on the highest court in the country. And he also joked that the friendship itself, how did you two guys met? Well, was the result of a bribe. And, well, this is the first story. The second story. Let's move from the United States closer to here. Let's move to Albania. And the case of Albania is an interesting case. You know that Albania is usually known as a country with good food, nice beaches, strong tribal mentality. But in the past 10 years, it has also become known among lawyers for its process of vetting judges. And this is a process which is initiated due to massive distrust in Albanian judiciary. This process, interestingly, started from the outside, although it was an internal problem. It was started with a finding, and you know that European Union is usually very reserved and diplomatic, but this time the chief of Eurelios, the European assistance mission to the Albanian justice system, stated that the whole judicial system in Albania is corrupt. And this triggered, this is what happened in 2014, 10 years ago, this triggered constitutional reform in Albania. And even in the Albanian constitution, you now find a rule which authorizes international reviewers, members of the so-called International Qualification Commission, to review this process of vetting of Albanian judges. What happened? Well, approximately 800 judges and prosecutors had to undergo a vetting process of control, in order to continue serving in their offices. And this vetting process was supposed to be over in 5 years. It is still not completely over, but up to this point, about 60% of Albanian judges were dismissed or have resigned from their posts. However, this is an ongoing process. Let me move to something even closer. What happened 4 days ago? We have the third example, and this is the example of judicial reform in Mexico. So 4 days ago, on 15th of September, the Mexican President Obrador signed one law, and this law was the law on judicial reform. The main element of this reform is changes in respect to judiciary, especially election and appointment of judiciary, and I listed a couple of those changes on my slide. But the most important element of this reform is that from now on, all Mexican judges will be elected at popular elections. So far, they have been appointed, just like in Hungary or in Croatia, by a High Council for Judiciary. This time, well, at all levels. By the way, Mexico is a country of 123 million people. It is the 10th largest country in the world. All judges in Mexico will now be elected. There will be some, well, conditions, law degree, minimum grade of 8 out of 10, 5 years of professional experience, but they will be elected for 9 years, and there will be possibility of only one consecutive re-election. And, well, obviously for political reasons, there will be a salary cap. No judge will be able to earn more than the president of Mexico. Why is such comprehensive reform introduced? And this will probably make Mexico the first country in which judges are exclusively elected at popular elections. It is interesting to know that there was a quite difficult political process that led to this. The proposal had to gain support of 2/3 in all houses of parliament. It had to be approved by the president. It also had to be voted by all the federal states, well, majority of the federal states in Mexico. But in the end, it was all completed. And it is also interesting to note that according to polls, 80% of Mexicans have supported the new reform. Of course, not everyone has supported this reform. For instance, United States and Canada have protested, but it's also interesting to know that the United States are also a country which has majority of judges which are elected at popular elections. 95% of all civil cases come to state courts, and in 39 out of 50 federal states, there is a form of popular elections of judges. Now, let me bring you to another question, and this is how trust of society is regulated, or do judges have a trust in particular regions? These stories may not perfectly illustrate the burdening issues, but now we can come to some objective indicators. The first one is the trust in judges and their independence in the European Union. And we can see that the European Union has a relatively good score. Well, we can say more people do trust in judiciary than don't. 53% rate the independence of judiciary as high or very high. 36% rate it as very or fairly bad. But this is just an average. For instance, my country, Croatia, is among those with the lowest level of trust in judges, and in 2023, only 23% of population rated judiciary and its independence as high or very high, and 73% rated it as very or fairly bad. And it's interesting to see how this is being distributed geographically. We can see here in red the countries where less than half of population have trust in judiciary. The countries with the most trust here in blue are the countries of Northern and Western Europe: Finland, Denmark, Sweden, Austria, Germany, the Netherlands, and Belgium. And on the other hand, in Southeastern and Mediterranean, also post-socialist countries, the trust is fairly low. It is visible by dominant red colors on this slide for Croatia, Poland, Bulgaria, Slovakia, and Hungary, but also Spain, Italy, and Portugal. It is noteworthy to see that the level of checks and balances in the appointment of judges roughly corresponds to public trust, just inversely. In the north, a cooperative system of judicial appointments is applicable. Usually, executive appoints the judges, whereas in the south and east, where, as we can see, people do not trust the independence of judiciary, we have a self-appointment by bodies like Italian Consiglio Superiore della Magistratura or other high councils for judiciaries. Now, let's move a little bit back to the United States. It's also interesting that in the United States, which, as we have seen, has this system of popular elections, and traditionally, the USA was a country which had one of the greatest levels of esteem for its judges and judiciary. It was even over 80%. However, what you see here is that it is not anymore the case. In 2015, the level of trust was just as much as in Europe, 53%, according to Gallup. But this is not all, because what we can see now, what was happening with the Supreme Court of the United States, is a continuing decline in trust. So currently, there is a record low of public trust of 47% in the United States. And therefore, many American journalists say that American Supreme Court is experiencing a crisis of legitimacy. So what are the solutions to this dilemma? I think they are encapsulated in two concepts, and these are the concepts of transparency and accountability. And through these concepts, we have some prospects of resolving this dilemma and bridge the gap between two equally undesirable systems, the one in which judiciary is dependent and politicized, and the other in which it is independent but unaccountable and distrusted. Let me just briefly provide you some definitions. What are accountability and transparency? I will just let you read what is on this slide for the sake of time, but let me note that transparency is intrinsically connected to the principle of publicity. It goes beyond this system, and it assumes the ideal of openness, the idea of open justice. This is the ideal that opens all relevant aspects of the judiciary to the public, including information on courts, judges, and other actors in the judicial systems. Together with accountability, transparency is the guarantee of public trust. And don't take me by my word, this is not very new. I can get back exactly 100 years because in 1924, it was a time when in one case, Lord Hewart stated what you hear now everywhere, and this is that justice should not only be done, but should manifestly and undoubtedly be seen to be done. What is important is the perception of justice, and it is now one of the core elements of the principle of open justice. How is this being reflected all over the world today? Let me offer you a typology or taxonomy of methods for securing accountability and transparency in national judiciaries. Again, I will not get into any explanations, just list what we have as security for accountability. These are the mechanisms of quality control of judicial judgments, merit-based judicial appointments, effective disciplinary proceedings, and productivity and efficiency criteria. On the other side, what transparency requires is adequate public insight into essential aspects that constitute the operation of any contemporary justice system, and these are public access to judicial decisions, publicity of court proceedings, transparency of judges' finances, and statistical transparency. And if I may so, I would just briefly get into 2 points here, starting with the public access to judgments. Well, quality control and public access to judgments. I think that we first have to admit a clear fact. The era of collecting judgments in legal books is over. Today, the principal source of access to judgments is internet portals. And here you can see how an internet portal of the Croatian Supreme Court looks like. What you can see is that you have some decisions, you can click on a PDF text, and apparently this looks fine. But I will tell you it is not fine. It is a bad example. Because, for instance, this site is difficult to search. Some important decisions are not published. Most of them, if they are published, it takes weeks and months to have them published. And there are no hyperlinks or tags that would make this site user-friendly. Do we have a good example? Yes, we do. I will show you an example that you might know already, and this is the website of the European Court of Human Rights. This court is now a common judicial venue for 46 countries and almost 500 million people, but it also has one of the most comprehensive practice of publishing judgments. And now I will not start with judgments, I will start with a recently opened element at the pages of the European Court of Human Rights, and this is the internal case law analysis, which is now public. It is called the Knowledge Sharing Platform. And its mission is to share knowledge collected by the court, and it is often collected by individual topics like transversal topics, environmental protection, immigration, LGBTQ rights, and so on. And the European Court also regularly publishes update guides, and these updated guides on case law, for instance, this is the one which is only a few months old, they also introduce a text with hyperlinks where you can click on a particular judgment and then see what is in the judgment. For instance, one of the leading cases on judicial independence, the Icelandic case, Guðmundur Andri Astrason, just you click on the link and you will get the full text together with the analysis, tags, keywords, and so on. And also, of course, you know the HUDOC. It is probably the best searchable system of case law in the world. You can search it according to whatever criterion, and most of the materials will be accessible publicly. And then there is also a similar site for the execution of judgments of the court. And finally, in addition to the written text, the European Court also publishes the webcasts of the hearings. They are live, but you can also access them later, like hopefully this lecture of ours. And although the court, of course, doesn't hold hearings in all cases, in all more important cases, you will see all of the hearings, and you can even easily get from one part to another, from the representative of the state to the representative of the applicants, and see how that was presented. And this last part actually brings us to another element which is very important for transparency, and this is publicity, publicity of the procedure. The classical principle of publicity allowed the public to be present at court hearings, unless, of course, the hearings were closed for specific reasons. But this right was traditionally rather limited. For instance, why do we have this photo? This is a photo of American Supreme Court from 1932. We have it because somebody broke the law. A photographer sneaked in the camera and made a photo, so now we know how it looked like when the court was in session in 1932. Nowadays, well, in 2000s, you have more and more cameras in the courtroom, so now we are getting slowly to the other extreme, to the public spectacle. And my opinion is that, well, getting cameras in the courtrooms is not a good practice. It may be useful in some cases, but it is much more important to provide access to documents, to provide access to files. And since now we all have files in electronic form, this is not at all very difficult to realize. I've recently been to Latin America, and in the courts in Brazil and the courts in Chile have all of their files openly accessible to anybody who would like to take a look at what is in the files. Now, again, I'm getting much closer to the end of my presentation, just to say a few words about the appearance of integrity. This is probably a most controversial thing now, because due to public distrust, now you ask secret police to provide information on judges. Seemingly, we believe more the secret police than the courts. And it's interesting that police actually is trusted more than the courts. But yeah, anyway, this is one of the elements to secure that, especially in the corrupt environments, you don't get the wrong candidates appointed. The other one is asset declaration, which is, again, a tool to prevent illicit enrichment, the tool to detect conflicts of interest. So for judges and public officials, you increasingly have this obligation to declare what you own: salary, stocks, well, even watches. Well, we had a case in Croatia about whether a collection of watches had to be declared publicly or not. 80% of countries have some form, according to a World Bank survey, some form of asset declaration obligation by public officials, including judges. And how does that look like? Well, in Croatia, we didn't have it, but we introduced it some years ago. Again, for quite some time, it was existent, but it was not publicly accessible. But then there was a pressure from the European Commission, and by law, the judges also now have their assets declared publicly. And when it first happened, it was a public spectacle. This is how it looked like. You have the evening journal, well, the main daily newspaper, which has published the photos of the Supreme Court judges together with their declarations. What do they earn on the side? What do they have here and there? But interestingly, well, unlike in Albania, unlike in Kosovo, we did not have a further major scandals that was actually illicitly acquired. So all of these judges are still serving, some of them retired, and that this was already, I think, 5, 6, 7 years ago. Now it brought a certain level of trust to at least the judges of the Supreme Court. I will finish with pointing to something that for me is very important, because to have transparency of judiciary, you need to have transparency of data on functioning of judiciary. And for that, you really need a lot of aggregate data, which you would need for analysis. And now we have some good examples. From 2003, I was one of the founding fathers of the CEPEJ, so I'm very proud of that. But starting in that year up to today, you have regular biannual reports on facts and figures on member countries of the Council of Europe and their judiciaries. And 10 years later, in 2013, you have now the European Union publishing EU Justice Scoreboard. So every year you have more and more aggregate data which enable us to compare. But the problem is that both sources are actually political sources as well. They come from political organizations, and they don't have a thorough scientific backing. So what we need is now good analysis of that aggregate data, and for that we need good doctrine. And now we do have some good doctrine, at least the beginning of it. For instance, here is one book which has been recently published by Max Planck Institute in Luxembourg, with a number of interesting texts on the notion of open justice. And if you're interested in seeing more, and especially if you're interested in judicial independence, it is probably advisable for you to check. That was the topic of the World Congress of the International Association for Procedural Law, which happened in September last year. And it resulted in a book in which you have collected general reports. One of those reports is my report, and you can also find it on my web pages. My report was the report on recruitment, remuneration, salaries, judicial salaries, and retirement of judges. And this is more or less what I wanted to tell you. One thing was omitted, and this is intentionally omitted. For public trust, you also need efficiency. Sometimes efficiency is even more important than some of the elements that I was talking about, but the element of judicial efficiency is going to be discussed at the World Conference next year in September, so 1 year from now, which will take place in Zagreb. So I thank you very much for your attention and invite you, please come to Zagreb. It's not too far. Thank you.